speed.
Welcome back to the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, CPA Scorned and Millennial Screecher, Becca Platsky. I'm here with my brother and my co-host,
Data Analytics Playboy Adam Platsky.
And we are recording today on the floor. Literally everybody participating in this podcast is sitting on the floor, including our producer, Mike, from Jeff Skilling's Mountain House. And there's several dogs around us. It's, you know what? It's different. We're here. We're getting you this podcast with all our might. We are so excited for the finale episode of season 4 of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. We're talking about Bob's Red Mill, and we're answering your questions that you sent in throughout the season. And so are you ready to get started?
Please.
Okay, so we're talking about Bob's Red Mill. I obviously knew about Bob's Red Mill, and I'm going to pull up one of their products. This is rolled oats, whole grain. I'm going to try to keep it as far away from the microphone as possible. But this is a bag of oatmeal. And the reason why you might know Bob's Red Mill is because there's a jolly man on the packaging. He's staring at you right in the corner of the packaging, and he's got a little newsboy hat and a red vest, and that is Bob Moore. He is the founder of Bob's Red Mill, and he passed away earlier this year, and that's when I found out that he had left his entire company to all 600 employees. And immediately I knew, okay, this is the good episode we're going to do this season. I always knew that there was something kind of vaguely do-goodery about this company, but it wasn't until I actually did the research that I realized the expanse of what Bob Moore had done. Adam, you're more of a baker, I think, than I, so you might be already keyed into a lot of this stuff.
Oh, if you mean baker, my girlfriend bakes for me.
Right.
Then yes, I'm a baker. I didn't know much about Bob's Red Mill until I started doing the research. I heard the news that he was giving ownership of the company to his employees earlier this year, like you, and that had me intrigued as well.
Yeah. And I'll say, obviously we knew him more from his obituary, but it's not like people didn't appreciate this guy in life. He's got a bronze statue of himself. I mean, I think somebody else did that. It's not like he cast the bronze statue. As you'll learn about this guy, he's not the type to cast a statue of himself. But he's a hometown hero all the way up and down the West Coast, from California to Oregon. This guy was walking around like Tom Hanks in a newsboy cap. And I want to say, by the end of this summer, I'm going to be deep into my Bob's Red Mill summer. I'm going to be being jolly, perfecting my porridge, wearing a hat to protect my head from sun damage, and giving my company away to my employees. How about you?
No, I'm probably going to be a brat this summer.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, guys. This is Corporate Gossip number 1. It's a story you've all heard before, but with a twist. A business boy suffers a traumatic loss and a harrowing fire, and he doesn't turn into a raging asshole. Here's the thing I really like about this story is Bob didn't open Bob's Red Mill until he was in his 50s. So to tell his story, we have to go all the way back to February 1929, when he was born in Portland, Oregon, right into the belly of the Great Depression. And things were bad in Portland. I read on this website called the Oregon History Project that the governor wrote to FDR that he was worried about possible uprisings amongst the homeless population, or the Hoovervilles in Portland. And the people who led Portland at the time, it's hard to believe now, but they were incredibly conservative. They were against all types of public works projects and housing initiatives, and they worried it was going to bring unadulterated communism to Portland. Thank God they avoided that fate, huh? So that was the world onto which baby Bob was deposited. And 6 months after he was born, his dad moved the family to San Bernardino, which is outside of LA.
Correct.
And he got a job as a Wonder Bread truck driver, and he started this company with his father, Bob's grandpa, called the Independent Addressing Machine Company. And so basically, like, when you get a magazine and it's already pre-stamped with your address, that's the company that's not the company, but that's like the type of company that they started. And Bob would watch his dad and his grandpa work together, and he had this dream where he wanted to work with his dad one day. And so when Bob was a teenager and a kid, he would work late into the night with his dad, coming up with all different types of business plans, mostly in media. And, they talk about all the different business plans they would do together. I read in this book, and this is, I pulled a lot from some interviews that I listened to with Bob Moore, but this is also a book that I think he sells in the bookshop of Bob's Red Mill today, which is called People Before Profit. It's It's a book. I mean, I wouldn't, it's fine. It's a good biography. I wouldn't say it's not the most compelling book I've ever read, but it has a lot of good information. But in this book, I learned, that his mom late at night would kind of get the two of them to come to bed. They'd, be up all night trying to think about different business plans that they wanted to run together. Here's a quote. He said, "It was always when me and my dad would go into business together. It was never if. Looking back, the concept of father and son going into business together would permeate every aspect of our lives. But before they had a chance to go into business together, Bob's dad died of lung disease when he was in his early 40s. And his mom died soon after. They were both pretty heavy smokers, and Bob was too, I think, at a point. There's an interview I read, and he was like, it still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. I don't know about everybody else, but I miss my mom and dad every day of my life. And I have a video that I'm going to insert here.
An exciting future awaited, including business with his father.
Then my dad dies. This was my dream, was eventually to do something, would have been in advertising, some kind of media, that kind of thing, because that's what he was in. And he just up and died. And it was a shock to me. Honest, Pat, it's still a shock to me today. I'm going to picture my dad. I look at him up there. It's him on the end there. And he was just the sweetest guy that ever was. God, it makes me cry.
Eventually, he moved on.
And according to this book, to this day, he still thinks, what could have been if my dad hadn't died? So after he graduates high school, he enters into the Army, and this was 1947. So he had kind of missed the action in World War II, but he was sent to the Marshall Islands, specifically in Micronesia in the Northwestern Pacific. And in some of the history that I had read about him, they were like, yeah, he's building bridges in Micronesia. But then I was like, what the heck were they doing in Micronesia after World War II? I didn't realize this, but Micronesia was fucked up during World War II. Basically, the Japanese showed up and were like, this is ours now. You guys are going to be shipped off to Guam. And then the U.S. showed up. Obviously, they had won the war, so they had kind of colonized Micronesia and used the island as a base to do nuclear testing. Bob, as he reflects about this experience, he's kind of cynical about the whole thing. He tells a story about how all the soldiers basically got on a boat and would go out into sea and then watch as these little islands, they would just blow them to smithereens. And there wasn't people on the island, but there was a lot of wildlife. And so here's what he said. It was crazy, a big joke. We already knew how atomic bombs worked on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so I don't understand why we did all that. To me, it seems like playtime, like a bunch of kids playing in a sandlot with firecrackers on the 4th of July.
I read similar stuff, that they were building bridges and infrastructure in Micronesia. So it's interesting that you were able to find this, because everything I saw was that it was kind of
rebuilding,
helping, exactly. Yeah. So where'd you dig that out of?
I just Googled Micronesia World War II, and I was like, oh, okay, it's a little bit different than the story that they're so what were U.S. troops doing in Micronesia in World War II?
Right.
And that's what I found.
Very interesting. So with a little bit of research, you were able to find the truth.
Yes. He mentions too, he's like, I did think it was weird that we weren't allowed to take pictures or even write contemporaneous notes. That was odd. I was like, oh shit. Just all the shit that the U.S. military does. Anyway, but good for him for calling them out. I appreciate that. So right before his 21st birthday, he's spit out from the Army, discharged, honorably, I suppose, right? And he's a little lost. And he works a few different jobs until he opens a gas station, and he loved this gas station. It was Bob Moore's mobile station. And he says, when the station opened, my life just shone. This is what I'm supposed to do. To me, it was being in my own business, having my own customers. I felt the same way today at 81 as I felt at 26. I loved it. I worked 7 days a week. And this guy is he's a hard worker. Throughout his entire life, he can't really focus on one thing. And he's always kind of on the brink of failure. But what he doesn't ever stop doing is absolutely grinding from Monday to Sunday. It's kind of insane to see. So he gets a job after the mobile station, because what happens is he ends up opening up the mobile station in Mammoth, California. And I guess over a couple seasons where they had like no snow. And so there wasn't a ton of people going up to Mammoth to go skiing. And so it was a total flop. And so he got a job at a JCPenney's auto center. And he was an electronics technician there. And it was at that job where he would meet the love of his life, Charlie Coote. And here she is, Charlie. So he falls in love with Charlie. You ready for corporate gossip number 2?
Yes.
Sandy, you ready? All right. Corporate gossip number 2 is Bob Moore uses his membership in the International Brotherhood of Failing Upwardly for good. And so, like I said, the funny thing about Bob Moore is he's always on the brink. He's kind of in a 3-decade-long flop era. He's constantly failing and running out of money. But the thing is, a lot of people want to help him. There's a story when he's owning that mobile gas station that I talked about, and he had to write a check to cover the gas that was about to be literally pumped into the tank at that moment, but he didn't have enough scratch. He goes to the bank across the street and he explains the situation. And the banker's like, look, write yourself a check for the amount that you need, and I'll put that into your account. And, you know, I know you're good for it. So in the next couple of days, just come in and deposit the money. I know you're going to have enough cash in the next couple of days. And he effectively just taught Bob how to kite checks. Right. But like, I think that there's a few things at play here. First of all, Bob knew the banker. He actually used to date the banker's daughter. But when you have a small community bank, like they have a genuine vested interest in keeping you in business. Like they have other customers that need your gas station to fuel up, you know, for their landscaping trucks or their school buses or whatever. So those are the things you lose when you have those big banking conglomerates, because they don't give a fuck, you know, whether you're out of money or not. And they don't give it, they don't care, you know, those personal relationships that you create in the banking, you know, transaction don't really come into play. And this is a micro example of like how that kept this guy's business in motion.
But also Bob is eager to be part of a community and give back to a community. So I think that's a big part of his story as well.
Yeah, like he probably had some good karma built up with this banker. I mean, it also helps that Bob was a very jolly white man in the 1950s. So I think that's like something should be noted. So we're going to skip forward a few decades to the mid 1970s. And Bob and his family, it was Charlie and their 3 boys, are living in Redding, California. And Bob had sold his gas station and was working in the JCPenney's. And he's walking around the library one day and he looks down and he sees a book that's going to completely change the course of his life. And that book is called John Goff's Mill, which I actually looked and tried to find. It's like not in print. It's not at any library. It's a book from the 50s, which, you know, it seems to have gone out of print. But it's about this guy who was teaching anthropology at Harvard when he suddenly inherits his family's crumbling flour mill, and with no experience, with no knowledge in milling, just decides like, oh, I could do that. You know, why not? You know, the confidence of a man. And Bob's like, wait a second, I could do that too. I've never even thought about milling, but I kind of want to start my own mill. And so he does. He finds an old mill in North Carolina that's about to be torn down. He buys it, and he has the equipment sent to him in Redding. He buys a bunch of books on milling. He buys equipment from the 1850s. He writes to these people that he's finding in these milling periodicals, these magazines, gushing about how it's his dream to work with his sons and how much he loves old mills. Here's a quote. "It gave me a sense that I could do that, change directions in my life. Once I read John Goff's book, I was locked into this whole thing as a way of life." And honestly, this is so relatable. Like, find a book, get a new idea, and then just like go across the country, buy machinery, like completely change your life. And he kept his job at JCPenney. The mill was kind of like a side hustle. And it wasn't ever supposed to be the massive operation it became. It was just like a small mom and pop storefront that Charlie would man, and they would like sell whatever they would make. So they did that for a few years. They were in their mid 50s, and they were like, okay, you know, this mom and pop shop has been great, but I think it's time for us to retire and move to Portland and learn Hebrew and read the Bible and learn the Bible. And I'm pretty sure at this point, like, we can diagnose Bob with like light ADD, which again, very relatable to just like switch passions every half decade.
No, yeah, I think Bob has ADD. Yes, that seems clear. I like the interview that he gave that you'll touch on later, but like you need to listen to Bob speak. It's really special. He's got like such a great voice and a grandfatherly figure. But the way he describes, you know, we decided to go to seminary school and learn the Bible and Hebrew. We just up and decided to do that and better our lives. It's something I've always wanted to do, and he's a doer. He does what he thinks.
He's also very religious, not very religious, but he's very like spiritual. Like, but it doesn't seem in a way that's like offensive. Like he just finds it interesting. He's like, he always talks about the scriptures and how interesting the scriptures are. And I'm like not a particularly religious person, but it seemed like he was coming at it more from like an academic perspective of like, it's really cool that these texts exist from hundreds, thousands of years ago. I was like, I want to read them. And that was kind of cool. He definitely seems like a lifelong learner and somebody who's just like really into learning things and bettering himself in like whatever way. But yes, he's also like, to your point about the way he speaks, he's so jolly. He's like very giggly. And he just seems like a great hang. So they're in their retirement. They're up at seminary school in Portland, Oregon, and they're doing flashcards and like trying to learn Hebrew. And he says, he's like, we weren't very good at Hebrew at all. But anyway, one day they're walking and doing flashcards and they stumble upon this old mill in Portland and it's for sale. And he looks at Charlie and he's like, what do you think? You want to do it again? And I think she's a little hesitant, but she goes, look, yeah, let's do it. Like, I'm down. At this point, she's been on this ride with this guy for, 30 years. So you might as well keep going. And they do. And that's when the company you now know as Bob's Red Mill was born. Their first employee was a guy named Craig Ratzat, who grew up in the mill business, had a lot of expertise. And between his expertise and the fact that a local news outlet covered the new operation, the business really started to grow. Shortly thereafter, Bob asked Craig, like, do you want to be a 30% partner? And Craig was like, I really don't have enough money to buy into this business, like the value that it is today. And Bob's like, how much money do you have? And Craig's like, I got $1,400. And he's like, great, $1,400, you're a 30% partner. And here's a quote. He says, I didn't need his money. I needed him. You read stories in scriptures. Here he is talking about scriptures again, where the rich man gives little and the widow gives all she has. Who was blessed? The widow. That's how life is. That's the real world. It's just that the rest of us have our own goofy ideas sometime.
The other thing you're forgetting to mention, which Bob will be the first to mention, is that the original money for the mill was provided by Charlie, his wife.
Charlie, his wife. Yeah.
Charlie, his wife. Yeah. So he used her money. I mean, he was really no stronger than the woman behind him.
That's such a good point. Yeah. But yeah, so he gave this guy 30% ownership for $1,400. And that wasn't the last time Bob scammed himself. Jack Welch and Ronald Reagan are probably in the rafters like heckling him. Bob more like Bob less. Am I right? But he didn't let the misers get to him. Any other heckles? That's all I could really come up with.
No, you really crushed.
Okay. Right in with any other heckles we could have used. Anyway, Bob has spoken about, I also want to touch on like why he chose this industry, other than like it was just the next in a list of like 20 other things he would have done. But, he's spoken about why the milling business in particular meant a lot to him. It has a lot to do with the health aspect. Remember, like both of his parents died pretty young because of smoking. Bob smoked for many years before he realized like how unhealthy it was. Charlie's dad also died relatively young. And so he's passionate about like providing healthy food for people.
So interesting that he didn't, for such a smart guy, he didn't think maybe it was the cigarettes that killed them and not the processed foods.
Well, it also helps that in the, mid 1970s, they're really hitting the health food trend, like right as it's growing. So I think that helped too. There's like a lot of literature that is suddenly becoming very popular and in popular culture in the mid 70s. They were also way ahead of the curve in terms of gluten-free. They invested in a gluten-free operation, which basically means like you need two separate operations, because a lot of the times when people do, this is what anecdotal from what I've heard, but when you do gluten-free, a lot of times there's like cross-contamination because they'll use the same materials for the gluten-free as they will the non-gluten-free. And they started this back in the 80s. Like my best friend has celiac in the 90s and there was nothing. So this predates that. And so Bob Moore says, if you're going to grow gluten-free, that's all you're going to do. The farmers can't alternate crops of gluten-free millet with wheat or barley, nor can those plants be grown close enough to contaminate the gluten-free crops. They need separate equipment for the crops as well, from harvesters to storage tanks. And yes, we pay more for it. If you're going to have these handling procedures, you're going to charge more for it. And it's okay as long as you don't take advantage of people. And I'm sure people in the celiac community have probably been taken advantage of in the 90s and having people price their stuff way out of,
right.
Because they have this intolerance. So, he's in 2010, he and his wife donated a couple $1 million to the Oregon State University to develop a child center to study whole grains and child obesity, and another $1 million to a naturopathic college also to study child obesity. So they're pretty passionate about, I'd say they're the Michelle Obama.
And Bob's not a skinny guy.
No, that's a good point too. He's
he looks like Santa Claus.
Yeah.
It's if you looked at him, you'd be like that. Yeah, he looks like a
he's got Santa Claus bod
cosplay.
Yeah. That's a good point. But he did live to be 94. And if you watch videos of him, he's cooking. He is moving around the factory. The people who interview him are like, Bob, wait up. And he's like, no, come over here. We don't have any time. So, I mean, yeah, he's got a little belly, but I think he's still pretty healthy. All right. Are you ready for the twist and the turn of the story?
Let's hear it.
Corporate gossip number 3 is Bob's Red Mill was almost toast. So when Bob was 60 in 1988, an arsonist burnt down the mill. And this is an old wooden mill with dry wheat in it.
Right.
Literally it's going to explode with fire. And so, he gets a call in the middle of the night. He lives a mile down from the mill. He gets down to the mill. The whole fire brigade is there. He's like, guys, just focus on this milling equipment from the 1850s. If you can keep your water on that, I might be able to salvage the operation. And they do. But the entire building had to be basically scrapped. And this is kind of where all the threads in his life kind of come back together. His first inclination was actually just to leave the whole thing behind. And here's a quote from that moment in his life. He says, I was thinking of retiring after that happened, but I stayed with the business to help my employees. One had just put money down on his first house, and I couldn't leave them without jobs. This company's best years came after that. And how many guys would be like, I'm taking the insurance check and getting the hell out of here.
Oh, yeah. 95 guys out of 100 guys are doing that.
Yeah. So he goes to the local bank. Here's another thread, right? He goes to the local bank who they gave them excellent loans. After all, there were grocery stores like Fred Meyer's in town who were also customers at the bank. And they had a vested interest in keeping this company a going concern. Speaking of Fred Meyer's, apparently, I guess they were good. He was good. He ended up becoming good friends with Mr. Fred Meyer's, and Fred Meyer's grocery chains held space for him on the shelves in the store and didn't put another competing product in there while they were out of commission.
Yeah, there were signs up in Fred Meyer basically communicating that Bob's Red Mill was not being stocked right now because there was a fire and come back later.
Yeah.
They will rebuild.
And the bank loan that he was given was eventually forgiven.
Yeah.
People love this guy. People really want to help this guy. And the employees hung around. They helped Bob rebuild. Remember, a lot of them were already owners at the time because he had expanded the program that he started with his first employee, Craig Gratzat. Most of the employees were part owners of the company. And they didn't have to buy a single share. And, this is so funny because, how many times has a CEO told you, act like an owner?
Right.
I want you to, it's okay, if you want me to be an owner, make me an owner. But, Bob makes a good point in this book. He says, I don't want people to feel like they're renting their job and I could take it away from them at any moment. I want them to feel like they're owners, so I'm going to make them owners. And it worked. Here's a quote. Bob says, I think that many years ago, lots of years ago, I felt as if the company became profitable, that sharing the profits with my employees, since they were the ones that made it possible, was something that I should do. And I inaugurated a a portion of the profits paid out to each one of the employees according to the hours they worked and the length of time they had been with me. So with all of that help from the community, from his employees, 6 months after the fire, Bob's Red Mill was back in action. And here's how much it grew over the next couple decades. In 1988, when the mill burnt down, Bob's annual sales were about $3 million a year. In 2005, they were somewhere between 30 and 50 million. In 2023, or the last interview I saw, it was 300 million.
Wow.
So by 2010, though, Bob had given his entire company to his employees. Here's his quote. I decided this year to give my company to my employees through an employee stock ownership plan. This is also called ESOP. Anyone who has been there 3 years or longer will have a piece of the business. I could have sold it. We got plenty of offers, but my employees, including the sales staff all over the world, have really made it what it is today. I'll take credit for being the energy and the spirit behind it, but they deserve to own the company. I'm 81 after all, and I can't take it with me.
Wow. Wow.
Position this next to Sumner Redstone, who's saying, I'm holding on to my voting shares literally with my hand that is barely even forming a fist anymore, and I will never die. Like, compare these two. And look at this. He's got a freaking statue of him. Where's the statue of Sumner Redstone? Here's another quote. The more everyone organizes and works hard, the greater the profitability of the company. And that translates into higher value of ownership, shareholder value maximization. That's the funny thing about this too. He's preaching the same shit that these other guys, these other CEOs are preaching. The difference is the shareholders are the employees.
Right.
But it's the same values. It's shareholder value maximization. In 2022, remember, there's like greedflation, right? And so they asked Bob Moore, what do you think about this greedflation and the labor shortage that goes along with it, right? Moore said executive greed was to blame and that more companies should adopt the ESOP model. He said employees at Bob's Red Mill felt valued and informed, an approach that other companies could learn from. Quote, business people continue to reach out to me, interested in buying my company, like they're doing me a great favor. They really thought I was a lame-brained idiot because I didn't want to sell my company. They told me how stupid I was, but you can't build what I've built and be stupid.
That's a great quote.
Isn't it?
I've heard of ESPP, which is Employee Stock Purchase Plan. Purchase Plan, right, where you can get your company's stock for a discount, 15 and 25%. Ownership program, that's great.
It's basically saying you work here. It's not necessarily employees owning the means of production, like, you know, I think a lot of people are advocating for, but I think it's like it's a sister of that model. Mm-hmm. Let's hit a few more nuggets before we get to the takeaways. So this is one of my favorite videos of all time. In 2016, Bob went to Scotland to participate in the Golden Spurtle World Porridge making competition. And he absolutely cooks. He takes this. What are you looking up? Porridge?
I'm trying to figure out what qualifies as a porridge.
Porridge
like,
is cooked cereal. So oatmeal.
Oatmeal.
Yeah. So he did steel cut oats. But you watch this video and I'll play a little clip of it and he wins and he starts crying. And you can tell he like really takes pride in the oatmeal. And I will have to say, like, how many CEOs of any company are actually the best at executing on whatever they're making?
Right. None.
Yeah, like he's actually an expert in porridge.
It went so wonderful. I won the Golden Spurtle. When my name was called out, I actually started to cry a little bit. I'm a little emotional anyway, but it's so meaningful for me. I've devoted my whole life to the good eating of good oats. And it's just what I do, and I'm so proud. This is going to make me very happy. Very, very happy.
Okay, here's another couple nuggets. Bob's Red Mill was the first manufacturer to sign on to the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment to collaboratively cut food waste in half by 2030. And I personally am very passionate about food waste, so I'm into this.
You're telling me we've got a 10-pound bag of compost in the freezer right now.
We're on a family vacation and I'm bullying everybody who enters into this house. I'll like snatch a banana peel out of their hands and put it in the freezer. This is really cute. He and Charlie were into like restoring old cars and they drove a 1931 Model A Ford to work. He was crowned the whole grain king by the Whole Grains Council. And you'll see this video on, or you'll see this picture on Substack, but he's wearing a crown. What a nice crown. It looks like a crown made of oats and corn.
Yeah.
Anyway, earlier this year, Bob died at 94 years old, and like a very active 94. It's not clear what he died from because there's videos of him like the year before, and he seemed very with it. Like I would love to be that with it and active at 94, despite a little belly. So you ready to move to the takeaways?
Yeah, let me hear them.
Oh, I want you to start. Go ahead.
Me start?
Yeah.
These stories are always so warm and heartfelt. I really appreciate them. Doing most of my reading through the year and hearing about misogyny and shareholder value maximization and you know all this crap and that's kind of all I read all year long for this podcast. So to do something like this at the beginning, I used to think, oh, why are we doing good companies?
Oh, really?
And now it makes me feel so much better.
I love it. I mean, it's a reprieve, and it also kind of like grounds you in the fact that like, okay, there is still some good out there. It's not awful. And like, you know, there are models you can take from if you find yourself as an entrepreneur, if you find yourself as a manager, as a leader, like there are blueprints out there that you can follow, that you can have not only a bronze statue created in your honor, you can fill your ego because people loved this guy, and you can still do good, right? Like both can be happening at the same time, and you can grow your company to $333 billion in value. And you made a good point about the valuation too in your notes about the way that they grew their value, how slow and steady their valuation grew.
A lot of people talk about sustained, slow growth. And you can't really do that when you're trading on Wall Street.
Yes. And that's exactly what they did, right? So it took 30 years to go from 3 million to 300 million. And that would not be tolerated on Wall Street. And remember, it's an employee-owned, privately held company. And I think that's very beneficial.
And the steady leadership, like you can take a loss in a year and say, listen, you know, there's a lot of headwinds. We're going to take a loss.
Nobody's worried about being fired.
Nobody's going to be worried about being fired. We're going to do what's smart. We're not going to lose our cool, lose our head because we report to ourselves.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a couple videos of Bob like walking around the corporate office, and he kind of reminds me actually in the last good CEO episode we did with Costco, or it was two good episodes ago, where Jelinek would just like show up and like bust through doors like, what are you guys doing? Let me see. Oh, look at those slides. Cool. And even though like Bob had effectively retired from CEO like years before, he's still just like bopping around the office. Everyone's happy to see him, but it's just kind of like jolly old man running around. And it was kind of sweet to see. Okay, another thing I love about this story is like him starting in earnest when he was 50 years old at this company. Like how many, like that is incredibly relatable. And I think there's a lot of stories of people who like, there are many examples of people who don't really like get their groove until they're 50, but we don't hear about them all the time because we're like obsessed with 30 under 30. But this is much more impressive in my opinion, to continue to grind, and to be retired and like have that fiery passion burning in your heart and be like, I'm going to do it. Also like props to Charlie, because Bob would never have been able to do this. It is Bob's red mill, but it could have just as easily been Charlie's red mill because she was just as big of a part of us as he was. I think he just kind of had a face for flour bags.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
And talk about succession planning. That's one of the things he talked about in these videos. He's like, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm going to die. And like the only people I trust to take on this business are the people who work here now. So why would I not give it to them? That makes complete sense. So this place can live on after me.
Yeah, thank God. Let's we stop hiring from outside the organization.
We talked about how he died at 94 years old earlier this year. And like, I'm first of all happy that he's reunited with Charlie, who died, I think, a couple years before that. But I also hope that in heaven, he's like doing a business with his dad, like, cause he never really got to do that. And so I think that's really nice. Yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed this story. You might be interested. What other employee owned companies are there in the US? I'll link in the show notes, but here are the ones that I recognized. Publix Supermarket is employee owned. Did you know that?
Love Publix.
80% of the company is owned by the employees, and then the Jenkins family, who started the company, owns the remaining 20.
Best supermarket subs on the planet. Wegmans can get that.
Mike says best supermarket subs on the planet. Wegmans can get bunt. Wegmans is also seemingly, according to their own press, like a great place to work, but I don't think it's employee owned. Winco Foods, which is a grocery store in the Northwest U.S. Stewart Shops, convenience store chain, which is famous for their soda, I think, and ice cream. New Belgium Brewing, they're the ones that do the Fat Tire beer. Life Touch, remember Life Touch?
No.
They're the ones who do like school pictures.
Oh.
Didn't your mom work for Life Touch, Mike? I think she did. Oh, I'm pretty sure your mom did work for Life Touch. But anyway, King Arthur Flour, which is another baking company that's based in Massachusetts. They've been around since 1790.
Wow. That's awesome.
And Miller Knoll, the Herman Miller chair
Yeah.
guys. Although I thought that was interesting because that was the CEO who was like canceled earlier this year for talking about being in a pity party because nobody got bonuses. She was like super condescending to her.
Okay.
Anyway, so I thought that was
I
kind of
didn't know
interesting.
that.
It doesn't necessarily, just because you're employee owned doesn't mean that your CEO is like a Bob Moore.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Or you can charge $1,000 for a chair.
yeah, those are expensive chairs. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little breath of fresh. Do you want to take a break actually before we move to questions?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a break. Okay, it's my favorite part of the podcast where I got to thank everybody who bought us a coffee this season. Timbo Slice, Brian Chu, Lauren, Rodolfo C, Tom, friend of the pod, Miles Brady, RJ Partner, Alex F, Vivian, Emily H, Steve Branham, Lana Bear, Jill Johnson, Manager Method, aka Ashley Hurd, we love her, at -9, Carrie, Joaquin Bridges, Mackenzie Fitzpatrick, at Cassin that, Claire Agnew, Jacob M, Cassie from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, Jesse M, Gigi, Stefan, Aaron W, at Chris Moritz, at Riam Stories, hey Riam, Melanie, Kevin, Tina Stansfield, at Bill Tuomala, Asser, Rachel, at Miss Kwame 76, blowdart.me on Blue Sky, and Natalie C. Thank you, everybody, for your support. It truly is the thing that makes this pod run. We really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next season. And we're back. Okay, so now the part of the finale episode. I think we've done this at least 3 episodes or 3 finale episodes so far. We start with a good episode, and then we move to the questions. So these are questions that I've been collecting over the past couple of weeks from Patreon and Instagram, and I want to thank you guys for submitting them. So let's go through some of these. So this is the first one. I didn't catch who sent this one, but they said, I would love some corporate gossip lore. I believe Becca's TikTok came before the podcast, but I'm fuzzy on that. So how did you guys get started? Who and how got the idea? How do we know Mike? Okay, so corporate gossip lore. Let's go all the way back. Adam and me and our friend Malik started a like software startup. It's very much lowercase s startup. It was more just like a little hobby that we were doing on the side called Night Toast. And you might recognize Night Toast as the name of the like quote unquote production company that does our podcast. We're an indie podcast, but I just had to put something in that field. So it's called Night Toast Media. Anyway, so that was a software that we were trying to start that would kind of calculate. I don't even have to get into it. It doesn't matter what it was. But we did that for a year and that was fun. And in doing that, I started a TikTok where I was talking about kind of like current events in workplace, current events in corporate. And then I started doing a series on Enron. And when I did that series, I thought, oh my God, I want to really talk about this for more than 60 seconds. I want to talk about Enron. I want to talk about the juiciness. I want to talk about Jeff Skilling and Lou Pye and all these crazy characters. And that's when I got the idea, maybe we could do a podcast. It also helped that my boyfriend at the time, now my fiance, Mike, our producer, was opening a podcast studio at the same time. So what do you call that? Connections? I don't know if it's a Nepo. Kismet. There we go. And
You're a Nepo fiance.
I'm a Nepo fiance. No, it really worked. And that's why, I think, and it also worked that Adam had moved into town like 2 weeks before and had a lot of time on his hands because you really hadn't made any friends yet. So it worked out well. So that's kind of the lore. And it really started from there. And we did our first episode on Peloton. Yeah, I think having a TikTok following certainly helps because I think it helped us grow this audience a lot quicker, I think, than we would have had we just started with a podcast. Anything else to add to that lore? Shout out to Malik. He was really like one of the founding Night Toast people. And I'm trying to get him on an episode soon. This next question, and I'm just going to go in these from order. These are a little quicker. So Jonathan Yarrington, cake or pie? I'm pie.
Oh.
I go pie, and I think like blueberry peach.
Okay, I've had a lot of time to think about this. I want the chocolate pie, the Matilda the Matilda chocolate cake.
Mike, cake or pie? He's not Mike, so I'm gonna have to tell. His mom's carrot cake, warmed up, scoop of vanilla ice cream. Interesting. Vanilla bean. Okay. So which one of these? This is from Just Give Up. Which one of these companies would be the most fun to work at in its heyday? And obviously, we're assuming that we're, I guess, somebody that's in the C-suite and not somebody who's being harassed by one of these people. So my answer has to be Enron, right? I mean, I don't think there'd be anything better. That was pre-socks. That was pre-internet. I think to be Lou Pie.
Yeah.
Lou Pie, remember I don't know if you guys remember, you can go back to this Enron episode, but he was going out to strip clubs. He got out right before anything hit the fan. He had to pay a fine for his insider trading, but it was less than the money that he had spent on. He basically made more money off the sale of one of his houses than the fine that he had to pay. So like, I think to be Lou Pie is to be at one of these companies that would be the most fun to work at in its heyday. But what's yours?
I really do think it would be fun to be David Zaslav. I mean, just the connections that you have. I'm pretty susceptible to like being starstruck.
Oh yeah.
And things. And I saw him at a Knicks game just like sitting next to somebody, and I was like, man, that would be so cool just to be like call up and go to a Knicks game whenever you pleased, or like just be like a kingmaker. Yeah, I mean, sure. Like your personality defects suck. Yeah. But just to have all those connections and to do whatever the hell you want when you want to do it at the drop of a hat and be like a kingmaker, that's a lot of power. I don't know that I could handle it, but I think it would be king for a day.
Yes. I think if I was David Zaslav and I knew that I didn't have to be anxious about everybody hating me all the time. Because
how about David Zaslav for like a week? I want to be David Zaslav for a week.
Right now. Yeah. Knowing that you could leave that body so it doesn't matter if people hate you. Because I think that would be enough to ruin it for me.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, good question. Zach Natch. Like natural, I think. Least favorite reality TV program. They all really are art in their own form. I can't think of one that...
I think the early seasons of The Challenge are pretty hard to watch.
Oh, yeah. Early seasons of The Challenge are really absolute cancelable moment after cancelable moment. But there are some gems in there as well.
But like you can see also when we like, it really helps us cover these media companies because just like the rampant, none of this stuff would be allowed, right?
No.
Like the rampant
verbal abuse,
plying them full with alcohol. Yeah. Like it would just be so liable now.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think like a lot of the it's a lot of the cheap shows I think that Zaslav makes, like that he just kind of churns out, like Smothered, stuff like that, which I think I know it feels very exploitative, so it's like hard to watch.
But you love Sister Wives.
I do. Both Sister Wives is 20 seasons now. You know what I mean? Like it's they started, I think, before a lot of that. But yes, I do love Sister Wives, and I think there's a new season coming out soon. Anyway, do you have a least favorite reality? Oh yeah, you said The Challenge. Okay, here's a good one. How do I vote my proxy? This is how I know I have the exact right. We have the exact right audience because we're getting how do I vote my proxy next to least favorite reality TV program. And they're both appropriate for this podcast. So voting your proxy. So I need to create a how-to guide on Instagram. And I promised, I think the person who wrote this question or maybe somebody else who DM'd me about it, I would do it. And I just have not had the time. But here, let me give you a quick rundown. if you're on Robinhood, you can actually just go in your mail and Google Robinhood vote, and you'll be able to find. And there's actually a really nice interface where it gives you everything that you're eligible to vote on. You can do it right through Robinhood. It's so easy. If you're on Fidelity, I think that you have to go to like a tab that says proxy. And I think the same is with like Charles Schwab or Morgan Stanley or anything like that. They each should have like it in your interface in the dashboard where you have all of your stocks and bonds. And as I keep talking about this, let me quickly explain what a proxy is. It's effectively a ballot that every shareholder has. It's either you get a vote for every share or a vote for every dollar amount. And you can vote on things like whether the CEO should get paid the amount that they're paid. For example, in Salesforce, Mark Benioff's pay package was just voted down by shareholders. You can vote on ESG initiatives. So that's environment, sustainability, and governance. You can vote on board of directors. You can vote on all different types of things. And then the last way to vote on your proxy is you would get the annual statement in the mail, and there's a single sheet that should come on the top of that proxy, and it should have like a QR code or a website you can go to and you can do it, or you can mail in the proxy as well. So definitely call your brokerage account if you're not getting those. Did I miss anything on the directions? I think I got it.
Great directions. Or Google.
Or Google it, yeah. Not to be like condescending, but if there was anything that I didn't capture in terms of directions, you can find. I love this same person, Liz O'Keefe, asked this question. Did companies taking away strip clubs for company spend impact the stripping industry? You guys would know better than I would.
Yeah, I guess if anyone knows of like an NPD or a Nielsen ratings for strip clubs that aggregates all of the information and we could see like year over year spend, I would imagine though, depending on where you are, the stripping industry has been, like the Baltimore strip club industry definitely was impacted by Under Armour because really, they're one of the few shows in town.
Yeah,
in Baltimore.
Like again, Houston, I have to imagine when Enron went down. Well, but then again, maybe they're going to strip clubs more out of
long term though
anger.
Lost jobs.
Yeah, lost jobs. Yeah, it's definitely possible. I don't know that there is a what's that website that has all the Statistica?
Yeah.
I don't think
that's what I'm saying, like an NPD or a Nielsen for strip clubs.
I don't think
or for like dark money stuff.
Yeah. Somebody's got to be running that data. I don't know where we'd find it. All right. Christian E. Krog, Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, or Pepsi Zero. For me, it's Diet Coke and a full fat Coke for fun.
I like Coke products, but it's taken me a lot of time to get to a place where if somebody says they don't have Coke, I will have Pepsi. I'm okay with that now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a new behavior.
Interesting.
But I'm okay with it.
I'm not. I go ginger ale if there's no Coke. Anyway, okay, Shelby. What type of person becomes a good CEO rather than an evil one? And what a great question considering the episode that we just finished. What do you think, Adam?
What makes a good CEO?
What makes a person a good CEO rather than an evil one? Once you get that
introspection, therapy,
self-awareness,
being tethered to reality. So like I said, being David Zaslav for a week, I think being David Zaslav for over a year would be really hard. I think he would get out of touch really quickly.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I think being in that much power takes ice cream scoops out of your brain. Like it has to. I also think like, I don't know. I could be critiqued on this one. But I think like just having a sense that like there's something bigger on this earth than you. Now, I don't want to use the word higher power. I don't want to use that terminology, but like knowing that like you're like having a sense that this world is massive and you are literally just a speck and that the only thing you can influence is like the immediate people around you. Because I think that a lot of these guys just have these illusions of grandeur that like Sumner Redstone, for example, like he's dead. He's gone. Like nobody at Paramount is thinking about what he would do at this point. If anything, they're like, let's do the opposite of what he would do. And like, what kind of legacy is that? So like, if you look at a leader like Bob Moore, they actually are thinking about that. And that's because he was like, I'm creating this company for this community, not just for myself.
Yeah, I don't think Bob Moore is sitting there and thinking about like his legacy either. I think that's such like grandiose thinking to be like, well, what's my legacy going to be? Like, that's your first issue.
Yeah.
You should just be living your life the way you want, not the way you want, but to leave.
Legacy is like a symptom of a life well lived.
I don't know. I think like, did you leave? This is getting out there, but did you leave this place or your impact in a greater?
Is it better than how you found it?
You left it, right? Like the campsite.
Yeah.
Pack it in, pack it out.
Yeah. Pack it in, pack it out. That's a great. You know what? I really like that in terms of life.
Yeah.
Pack it in, pack it out. Did you leave it better than the way you found it? Apply that to life. And that is how these CEOs, and the assumption that the ironic thing is they would assume like the fucking CEO of Halliburton probably thinks that he's leaving this world better than how he found it, because of all the shareholder value, right. Because we have poisoned them, unfortunately, I think, with a lot of these misguided incentives. Larira. Will you be covering any UK stories? We have so many. The post office, Thames Water, COVID PPE. I really want to do the post office, the UK post office. I don't know if you've heard any of this. I don't know if this is the same person who sent me these stories a while ago, but it's actually fascinating. But I guess I would think that the Schmuck Session episode we did touched a little bit on a UK story with the News of the World scandal and the phone hacking scandal. But yeah, we should branch out a little bit.
Yeah, but I think a lot of our stories are global.
Some of them are, like Nissan certainly was.
Yeah.
But I think we can do it. We could certainly open up. We can look at like country specific stories. I think the UK would be a great place to start. And thank you, Larira, for providing a couple of examples. Here's a question. Lana Heartbear, why does Adam say speed before every episode?
Adam says speed before every episode because Rebecca and I's favorite movie growing up was Heavyweights, and it's a very, very famous. I don't know that's famous line, but it's one of the lines we like.
Yeah, where they say speed, and then we'll add it. I'll tell you what. It's from this clip.
Well, are you rolling now, Kenneth? Speed. Does that mean rolling? Yes, it does.
And then our last two questions from North Star reads, the first is, how do you pick the companies that you will cover? So a couple of different ways. First, a lot of them are listener submitted, especially if the listener provides like not a personal anecdote, but like how they got into the story. That's really helpful and helps us get into it. Otherwise, honestly, we're just looking for like juicy human stories. So we often start on like the Post or like the New York Post or Page 6 and start with those kind of stories, like the gossip rags. And then we move it to like a Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg or whatever to kind of validate and get the financial implications behind that. But it's a lot of times it's just like stuff that we see in places that you wouldn't expect it. In terms of business news. So like Page 6 and just like seeing and be seen around the Hamptons, like star snaps.
Yeah, star snaps are great. If something leaks over into Page 6 from like a corporate perspective, like an executive leaves in like a real messy way, an executive divorce, that's really great.
Yeah.
That's a majority of it, right? And I think Reddit also.
Oh yeah, Reddit. That's a good point too. But again, I'd say like at least half of our episodes are listener submissions.
All right, is that it?
No, one more question from North Star reads, any podcast recommendations to tide us over until next season? If you like Producer Mike, you can listen to the other podcast that he produces called Bone to Pick with Paul Verzi and Bobby Kelly. And that's a fun podcast. Or This Week in Zoltan. That's another podcast that he produces. But otherwise, what else are you listening to, Adam?
I listen to Planet Money. Mm-hmm. I listen to The Daily. I listen to a lot. I've been listening to a lot more political podcasts these days. And that actually I think is helpful too, because I think one of the things that it's super topical right now is the Secret Service stuff.
Oh yeah, that's right. And we wanted to do an episode about the Secret Service next.
So
next
that's where I'm at.
Yeah, let me pull up my phone actually, and I'll tell you what I'm listening to. I was just on So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. So if you are into Bravo, definitely listen to that podcast. And I'll plug the other podcast that I was on this season, Chelsea Devante's Glamorous Trash. That's always a fun one. Here's just in terms of Bravo podcasts. I love Turtle Time. I like every day Nora McInerney does a podcast called It's Going to Be Okay, which I really enjoy. Here's a podcast that I've really liked recently. It's called The Town with Matt Bellany, and we've used a lot of his stories from Puck. Anytime we reference a story from Puck, that's his news outlet. That I really like. HR Besties, you guys have heard them on this podcast. What else? I think that's basically all I've been listening to. Yeah, I think that's it. I'll post more on my stories too, because that was a question that just came in. Anything else, Adam? This has been a great season. I've had a lot of fun. It's been a great summer. And also, like, if you want to, we have our reading list. So don't forget, if you want a beach read, go on our bookshop.org storefront. That's where you can find all the books that we read for this season, past seasons, and books that we're reading for future seasons. So those often tend to be fun. And we'll be honest about books that we like and we do recommend, and books that we say, you should pass. So check there. And if you want to follow us on TikTok, you can do so at Corporate Gossip Pod. Same for Instagram. If you want to email us, you can do so Becca@nighttoast.com or Adam@nighttoast.com. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so at Buy Us a Coffee. We do have the Patreon, but there's no new content on there right now. I actually took down the tiers because we use that to kind of like give everybody all episodes behind a paywall if they did want to wait for all the new episodes to come out. So we're going to kind of like retool Patreon for next season. I might start doing some exclusive content. We'll see how that goes. It honestly just depends on how much time I have. Because remember, guys, we both have full-time jobs and this is like a passion project still. Yeah, anything else you want to talk about in terms of the end of the season?
Rate and review. That's like super helpful. But did you have fun this season? Oh, I had so much fun this season.
Did you really?
Yeah, no, I did. It was exhausting,
did too.
But I had fun.
I was so tired this season. This is like maybe the most tired I've been, and I've learned a lot in terms of like my own time management and stuff like that. So, guys, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks again for another season. We'll see you in season 5.